morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. Look, we're going to talk to Nerida Conisbee this morning, the chief economist from Ray White, about the housing market and the impact that the budget announcement on negative gearing seemingly is already having on house prices across the country. But then Donald Trump went and told the world that the war with Iran was ending on Friday, so we've changed tack and we'll chat to Nerida tomorrow instead, although there is a rate decision coming later this afternoon too, so that might change the conversation completely again. So today we are picking apart the new US-Iran peace deal to see through the spin that's coming from both sides and hopefully get to the truth of it all, the winners, the losers, and whether Australia can ever go back to the standard cost of living crisis we were in before this war brought more economic turmoil and just compounded the pain. So let's get to finding out what's been happening while you've been sleeping. Here's the top stories for Tuesday, June 16. A Brisbane court has heard how a 15-year-old boy planned to use homemade explosives to target members of the Liberal Party over former leader Peter Dutton's nuclear policy. The boy, who can't be identified due to being a minor, allegedly researched how to make pipe bombs and had purchased equipment, although complained he wasn't able to buy ingredients for more powerful explosives at Bunnings. Another teenager reportedly called police when they became concerned about the things the boy was saying. He'd allegedly tried to influence his friends to send bombs to influential people in the mail. When police searched his home, it had to be evacuated when they smelled a strong chemical, which could have been used to make dangerous items. The teen had also purchased a book about the American domestic terrorist Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, and had been communicating online about bomb making and terrorism. Asked how he would plead to researching, purchasing equipment for and testing homemade explosives as part of planning or preparing a terrorist attack, he said, "Not guilty, Your Honour." The boy also pleaded not guilty to researching the Liberal Party and Queensland's Labor Day march in Brisbane as part of planning or preparing a bomb attack. The stepson of Norway's Crown Prince has been found guilty of rape. 29-year-old Marius Borg Høiby, who joined the Norwegian royal family back in 2001 when his mother married Crown Prince Haakon, was accused of raping a young woman in the basement of the Crown Prince's family home. The 7-week trial saw hundreds of text messages read aloud that exposed Høiby's drug addiction, volatile relationships with women, and even one from the Crown Prince himself that exposed how long the royal family had been aware of Høiby's behaviour and abuse issues. Prosecutors have called for Høiby to be sentenced to 7 years and 7 months behind bars. The family of a woman who was attacked by a shark at Coogee Beach in New South Wales on the weekend says her injuries are life-threatening and she remains in a critical condition. Leah Stewart was swimming between the flags and was close to shore when the shark grabbed her on Saturday. A local lifesaver described heading out to rescue her as terrifying as he saw the size of the great white that had bitten her.
And once I saw the shark come out of the water and the actual size of it, I found pretty shocking.
That's Charlie Verco speaking to Channel 9. The 35-year-old mum and teacher has had to undergo multiple surgeries, including having one of her arms amputated. Just days after Canada revealed they were following in Australia's footsteps and banning social media for under 16s, the UK is also following suit. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer made the announcement, saying he understands as a parent the want to protect children.
I think back to when I was growing up, and I have to say, I think we had it easier. These days, kids have to find their feet in a world that changes so quickly, where technology intrudes into every area of their lives. And we know that harms them.
As well as a ban on sites such as TikTok, Snapchat and Instagram, the Prime Minister said he would take action against gaming and live streaming services which allow children to talk to strangers. People following a new TikTok account that appears to be disgraced actor James Franco can't tell if he's unravelling or if it's all a publicity stunt. The series of videos show Franco pacing back and forth and speaking about something he saw in his garage that he claims is not human.
I saw hand, I saw eyes, I saw glowing eyes and hand. I don't know how many fingers, but hand and speaking. I don't know, something coming out of a saying thing, hand, and that was it. I ran
People in the comments are divided over whether the star's experiencing a breakdown or if this is a promotion for an upcoming movie. Although one poster did add a screenshot from another video where Franco, dressed the same, appears next to Vanderpump Rules star Shane Davis. The caption says the boys are back and we're working on a new one. Franco has been absent from Hollywood in recent years after he was accused of sexual misconduct. The allegations reportedly led to the breakdown of his formerly long-running creative partnership with friend Seth Rogen. All right, that's the latest. If you're heading off here, thanks for grabbing your daily update with the Solo Bureau. Don't forget to subscribe to the Substack newsletter. It'll keep you updated, and you can join the community there too, pitch story ideas and have conversations about what's happening in your world. You can also DM me on Instagram if that's your preferred method of interacting with the world too. Next, the US and Iran say they've signed off on a deal for peace. But what does that actually mean? Yesterday, it was announced that the US had managed to break through the weeks of what seemed to be two very different stories happening around the US and Iran peace talks. While the US kept saying they were close to inking the deal, Iran would say that's not true. But yesterday, Trump revealed that a deal had been agreed on to finally resolve the conflict that has killed thousands and caused chaos in energy markets. If you have forgotten why this war was started in the first place, the US and Israel launched a dual attack on Iran back on February 28. The reasoning for the strikes was twofold. One was to stop Iran from making nuclear weapons, and the second was to bring regime change after Iranians had been arrested and killed by the thousands in protests against the dictatorship. But what it also did was impact global oil prices as Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping passage that sees around 50 oil tankers a day pass through, carrying anywhere between 17 and 21 million barrels of oil. For us here in Australia, that meant almost immediate pain at the petrol pump, with the per litre price heading up and over $3 for diesel, and some servos even running out of supply completely. So is this deal really happening, and what change will that bring? Jessica Genauer is an Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of New South Wales. Jessica, thank you so much for joining the Solo Bureau today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Can you please explain to us this, what we're being told is referred to as a memorandum of understanding that's just been signed off on? I understand it will reopen the strait, but I can't get a clear idea of when exactly that will happen. And have Iran actually agreed not to make nuclear weapons, which is what I understand we went to war for over in the first place? Can you just explain to us what has actually been signed off on?
Sure. So there are sort of a few complex and moving parts, but essentially the idea is that there'll be this agreement signed on Friday that President Trump is quite keen to call a peace deal, but it is really much more a memorandum of understanding, which means that the one concrete thing that is supposed to happen if this is signed is that the US has committed to withdraw the military blockade that they have imposed on the Strait of Hormuz. So when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, if the US lifts that military blockade, which is supposed to come into effect immediately as of Friday, the Iranian regime has then said that they will respect free shipping in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. So essentially, shipping, maritime freedom in the Strait of Hormuz should, in principle, reopen, and there should be free maritime waterways if this all gets signed on Friday. So that's kind of the Strait of Hormuz. When it comes to the nuclear issue, however, it doesn't seem that there's any detail in this agreement that is supposed to be signed. And really, the only thing that the agreement says is that the US and the Iranian regime will continue to talk about the nuclear issue and try to get an agreement within the next 60 days from Friday. So this is basically kicking the ball down the road another 2 months. Yes, Trump has said as part of this deal, the Iranian regime agrees never to have a nuclear weapon, but that is not something the Iranian regime has said that they've agreed to. And even if they might have said that, there's no detail or structure wrapped around that. So what does it actually mean in practice about Iran being able or not being able to enrich uranium, which is obviously like a really contested issue and is part of the reason, at least according to Trump, that the US got into this war in the first place. So yeah, on the nuclear issue, nothing certain, but one concrete change that we might see is that the Strait of Hormuz might start to open up again to shipping.
hopefully bring down petrol prices eventually. Okay, so the other part of this, obviously, and sometimes we forget when we're talking about peace talks between the US and Iran, is that Israel is also involved in this conflict, as is now Lebanon. Any mention about that side conflict also being part of this agreement?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's a really important point because the way that President Trump tends to approach diplomacy is that he often thinks about it as just about sort of bilateral relationships. So between the US and Israel on one hand and the US and the Iranian regime on the other, but doesn't really realize that there's a whole regional conflict at play here with a lot of complex dynamics. So President Trump has said that, both of us, meaning both the United States and the Iranian regime, have agreed that this sort of more permanent ceasefire that comes into effect on Friday will include all fronts in the war, including Lebanon. Now, the Iranian regime and the US can't really agree to that without Israel also agreeing to that, because, of course, in Lebanon, it's Israeli troops that are on the ground in southern Lebanon, and it's Israel's war against Hezbollah, and the US is not directly involved in that war. So I think that what we're probably going to see is that Trump will manage to pressure Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to hold a ceasefire with the Iranian regime on the one hand, and to also hold a ceasefire with Hezbollah. And the Iranian regime will probably pressure Hezbollah to hold that same ceasefire with Israel, and that will stay in place at least in the short term. So I'm thinking something like weeks or maybe even months. But what I don't think we're going to see is we're not actually going to see Israel withdrawing their troops from southern Lebanon. And we're not really going to see a total cessation of all hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel. So this means that within weeks or maybe months, I think almost inevitably that conflict will flare up again. And when it does so, assuming that everything has sort of gone according to this plan, the US has withdrawn their military assets from the region, the broader ceasefire is held. When there are hostilities between Hezbollah and Israel in future, I think the first thing that the Iranian regime will probably do is to reimpose a kind of a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz or to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. And at that point in time, the US will no longer be stationed in the area. So overall, whilst I think generally it's good that the ceasefire is holding, no one wanted escalation in this war, but overall, we're not looking at a region that is more stable or more secure than it was before the 28th of February.
Jessica, I want to find out whether you think this, and I've been reading some commentary around that this ceasefire agreement or peace agreement or memorandum of understanding, whatever we're calling it at this stage, might actually leave Iran in a stronger position than they were prior to the war, in the fact that they are part of this agreement apparently is to release frozen Iranian assets, and that the US and allies will have to deliver some kind of reconstruction plan. And there's temporary sanction waivers that will allow them to then sell oil. And part of that whole reasoning for going to war was to remove the old regime and bring in a different regime and change Iran sort of at a cellular level. Is Iran actually, in fact, stronger than they were beforehand?
Yeah, so I think there are a few parts to this. And again, it's a kind of a complex picture. So on the one hand, we do have to acknowledge that the Iranian regime has been sort of politically hollowed out by this war and by the fact that a lot of their top strata of political leadership was assassinated. So the regime has sort of become hard and it's become even more militaristic. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has an even tighter grip on power and control. So in some ways, it's a more brittle regime. And also, the regime has definitely suffered massive economic damage as a result of the war. And also, their military capacity has been severely degraded. So there's definitely been damage on all those fronts. And we could say that in terms of those aspects, the regime is weakened. But on the other hand, if the Iranian regime does succeed in getting the US to release frozen assets and lift sanctions, which seems to be part of this agreement, that is a massive win for the Iranian regime and something they did not have before the 28th of February. Also, the fact that they've survived, they can sort of spin as a kind of a narrative win for themselves. And then, of course, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian regime has now shown that they have leverage, not only over the Strait of Hormuz, but they also have the ability to strike soft targets in neighboring Gulf countries. And I do think that that's something, given that the Iranian regime is staying in place, that is a kind of leverage that they will continue to use in future when they feel under threat.
Just finally, Jessica, is this the real deal? We have seen so much commentary from either side during these talks that Trump would say, yes, we're on a positive spin here. We are definitely making progress. We are signing off. It's imminent. And then we'll hear Iran say, that's not true. We're no closer to signing anything. We don't agree with any of the things that they are putting to us. This is all basically a bold-faced lie, is what they come out and fight over on social media. Is this actually the real deal this time?
So I think this is the real deal, only in the sense that I think it will go through, and it will go through primarily because the Iranian regime is not giving anything up for this deal. I mean, if they are getting their frozen assets released, they're getting sanctions lifted, let's say if it all goes through according to what seems to have been stated, and a removal of the US military blockade, the Iranian regime is really happy with that and not having to make any hard commitment on the nuclear issue and essentially saying we'll talk about it for 60 days. So that's actually a really good deal for the Iranian regime at this point. Like, they also need the ceasefire to hold, and they need to ensure that the US doesn't go back to a full military bombing campaign on Iran. They really wouldn't be able to withstand that forever. So this is kind of a good deal for the Iranian regime. And then the other reason I think it'll hold is because on Trump's side, Trump clearly wants to withdraw the US now from the region and to shift the focus in the US domestic context. So even though, Trump will try to spin this as a victory, but really this is not a great deal for the US. But I think the reason it will go through is because Trump himself just basically wants a ceasefire. He wants anything on a piece of paper that he can say, I've now solved this issue, the region is more stable and more secure, even though that clearly may not be true than it was before. And now he will move on and kind of shift the US domestic agenda. So even though I wouldn't say, it's not true to say that the US is weaker than Iran, because ultimately the US is the greatest military power worldwide. But I think more what we're seeing here is the limits of military power, particularly, if you're only willing to use military power from the air. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that the US should have put boots on the ground. I think that in itself would have been a fiasco. But the limits of just using airstrikes and assuming that will be able to break the political will of your opponent, which clearly in this case it didn't. So I think we're seeing here Trump making the calculus that he doesn't want to escalate, he doesn't want to put boots on the ground and get completely bogged down, and so basically he needs to withdraw. So I think, yes, this is a turning point, and I think that it will hold. But again, as I said, it doesn't mean that the region is left more stable or more secure than it was before the war.
Jessica, thank you for talking us through what is turning out to be quite a complex little memorandum. We really appreciate you helping us out. Thank you.
My pleasure, Claire. Thanks.
As for the impact of this war on Australians, who felt it mostly at the petrol pump, but realistically, that fed into the supply chain in many different ways. Could have possibly led to more people being made redundant, for example, as businesses tightened their belts or even closed their doors. The price of everything also seemed to jump. Will the end of this war actually bring some relief? Well, that does still remain to be seen. But the announcement of the deal has already seen the price of oil fall, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has revealed that he'll wait until next week to make a decision on whether to extend the fuel excise rebate that was brought in 3 months ago to reduce fuel by 26 cents a litre at the pump. The deal to end the war will at this stage be signed in Switzerland at a ceremony on Friday. US Vice President J.D. Vance will be in attendance, but Donald Trump said he didn't know if he would go. A US official confirming that the agreement has already been digitally signed by both the President and Vance. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning, friends. If you have a tick and don't mind talking me up, something I find incredibly hard to do, but I'm learning after all the insanely nice things you all wrote to me when I launched this show that I do have to do better at tooting my own horn. But if you could also do it by rating and reviewing the show, that makes me look really good on the charts and then gives us all some bragging rights. Like that time I was beating Karl Stefanovic, which many of you, and to be honest, also me, found very hilarious. Have a great day, team. Catch you tomorrow.